Two, 4, 2, 3. Now dampen it there.
The struggle to save our public schools is finally a struggle for the American democratic promise.
Listen to the pitch.
It's a struggle that will finally be won or lost on the level of every individual community. A struggle to win back the commitment of parents, win back the faith of citizens.
Yeah, just a clarinet trio.
If we really want our whole country to be strong, there are only 3 or 4 major institutions that the public has ongoing responsibility for. And the basis of most of our lives came through the public schools. That's where we...
Joyce Stark is one of a small band of women in Kansas City who have been fighting to save the public schools for 10 years.
And to me, it is a civic responsibility not to let an institution that has been very much a part of the development of this country and its people begin to fall apart.
Southwest High School, Kansas City, Missouri. This was once the best school in the city. But during the 70s, the community lost faith in Kansas City schools. Today, Southwest is laboring to reclaim that community faith. The struggle of Southwest reflects the struggles of schools across the country, trying to win back the trust of the American people. Southwest once served only this pleasant upper-middle-class neighborhood on the edge of Kansas City. Back then, the public schools here enjoyed the ready support of the community. Then, in the mid-70s, the first desegregation efforts. They met with anger, suspicion. Also, 2 teacher strikes closed down the schools for weeks. The turmoil, uncertainty, fear drove thousands of families out of the school system. In 5 years, school enrollment plunged by more than 30%. Tim Lewis is among the few students from the Southwest neighborhood who still go to public schools.
It was very hard to get used to seeing my friends leaving out of junior high to go to private schools and thinking, man, that would have been fun to play football with those guys up at Southwest. But if you were to talk to someone from a local private school, they would say, is it dangerous over at your school? Are there as many problems as they say? Is there a chemistry class and a physics class? Those are the kind of questions they ask. Obviously, there's no danger at Southwest. And there is a chemistry class, there are quite a few, and there are physics classes. There's so much misinformation in the community about the school.
On the struggle of Southwest now to reclaim the trust of the middle class could hang the future of the entire Kansas City school system. This nation of different races, unequal classes, has ventured much in its massive endeavor to educate all our children. But now, to reclaim the trust of the middle class, the schools must prove that extraordinary democratic venture can work, that one common school can lead our most gifted children as well as our disadvantaged students to achieve their full individual potential. One of the gravest dangers to our public school system over the next decade is the possibility that middle-class parents, black and white, will continue to abandon city schools, taking with them the support, the expectations, the energy, the leadership those schools so vitally need. That is what the fight is about in Kansas City. And if school systems like Kansas City's are to be saved, it will be because ordinary citizens have decided to breathe their schools back to life. The story of the reform movement of this Midwest city could be the story of school reform movements all over the country. Here, that movement to lift standards, lift falling test scores, began with parents.
Parents will frequently say, what can I do? I think school people should be asked, what are the goals of this school and are they being reached? I don't think that's an unreasonable question to ask. And more than that, if the answer is fuzzy, then it should be asked again.
When this group of parents first tried to ask hard questions, they found they had to fight a bureaucracy that wanted no part of them.
When you go to the principal, it was downtown's fault. They couldn't do anything because it was those downtown administrators. You'd get downtown, oh, it was board policy. We can't change that. We can't do anything about that. It's board policy.
The first time some of us did try to change things, we weren't very careful about how we suggested the change. We were somewhat abrasive. We didn't want to hear any more arguments, and we didn't want to wait for the next meeting and the next meeting, and so there was a period of real friction.
We would go meet with people on the board, and they would shake their heads, and you'd go to the meeting and wait for something to happen, and it never happened. And then at some point, we began to say, well, we've got to get somebody on the board who really will vote when the issue comes up. And that worked its way around the horn, and Joyce was the obvious candidate.
Within a few years, Joyce Stark, Karen Lewis, and Sue Fulson were all elected members of the Kansas City School Board.
I do solemnly declare that I will support the Constitution.
Stark would eventually become president of this new board. Sue Fulson would become treasurer.
We got him on the board.
To revive a school system is an awesome task. To break through the bureaucracy. To build curriculum. To hold the brightest. To regain public confidence. In Kansas City, the new board was immediately plunged into the difficult issues of race and class. Much of the middle class had fled, and now over half the students were poor, many with little academic tradition, a national pattern.
Consequently, the attitude accompanying all of this on the part of the schools was to really lean over backwards, to try to move these youngsters along.
In many schools, teachers simply didn't expect much from minority students. Lowered expectations led to a lowering of standards in academics and discipline.
It's the reverse prejudice that we call it. It's the patting them on the head and saying, oh, aren't they cute, okay? And not expecting them to actually attain.
Stephanie Spears became president of the Student Council at Southwest, but remembers well when some teachers expected little of her.
It was like they didn't think we were as intelligent. You know, like, if I didn't study, it wasn't like they were going to say, Stephanie, aren't you going to study? It was like, maybe they expected me not to study.
The challenge is not only lifting expectations for all students, but nationwide to return to the mastery of fundamentals. Now, in hundreds of districts, standardized tests are being revived to more truly measure student achievement. Automatic promotions from grade to grade are being eliminated. Graduation requirements are being raised. At the heart of the school reform effort, a new concentration on teaching students to read, write, and speak with logic and clarity.
And I believe that probably the most important single failing in schools in the curriculum has been the failure to say, in the earliest years of education, the mastery of language and the skillful use of English is the most critically important goal we have to achieve.
Southwest Principal Barbara Lusk, brought to office by the reform movement, has achieved some small gains.
You have about 30 seconds, fellows, to get to class.
But the school's overall scores are still too low. Like every principal in the district, her capacity for reform is limited by resources, by money. Lusk knows that the school's last best hope are the community committees set up by the reform movement.
This committee needs to
Today, these committees not only help develop school policies, but offset limited budgets with volunteer help.
Because we have a group of parents.
Okay.
And they are developing urgently needed partnerships with business leaders.
Henry Block.
And I am pleased to tell you that H&R Block is going to fund an advanced calculus class in Southwestern.
To recover the faith of business leaders, of the community, of middle-class parents, public schools like Southwest must prove they can prepare students for any university in the country. In Southwest's battle for community support, every personal success becomes a school triumph.
Just calling you home. Did you get the letter from Mom?
What happened? Is she in there?
Mr. Lusk and
April 16th, notification day for Eastern colleges.
She didn't bring it?
No.
Tim Lewis was due to hear from Yale.
Yeah, I don't want to go.
Yeah, I better go check.
He restlessly waited for his mother to bring his mail.
Is somebody on the phone? We'll have to wait.
Stephanie Spears was also waiting to hear from Eastern colleges.
I know he's got to bring my stuff up.
What's what?
Your mother's got a call back, so
She is?
you have to wait, dear.
5 minutes?
Well, I don't know, just...
I thought Mrs. Cummins said in.
So
Okay.
sit down and...
Okay.
Go check and see if the mail came there.
So how much longer do you think?
I don't know, Tim. They said they were going to...
Maybe I should just...
Mrs. Lusk said for you to wait.
Okay.
Hello? Did he come? The mail. Did I get a letter? I got 2 or 3? Okay.
Stephanie had already been accepted by the University of Missouri, but her highest hope was an Ivy League school.
This is the first graduation in years in our family, and my grandmother has 7 grandchildren, and I'm the first one to graduate. I'll call Dad and tell him. Here.
Stephanie was rejected by Barnard, by Amherst, and by Dartmouth.
I'll call him.
A few weeks later, she would accept an offer to go to the University of Houston. Stephanie had reached a goal deeply important not only to her, but to Southwest. She was part of a new generation of black students to go on to college.
Did you get in?
What happened?
Did you get in? No, we're sitting.
They said both of them?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not good.
Did you get in?
Don't hurt me.
That's really sad.
Did you
What?
open the Elsa yet?
No, I haven't gotten it yet. My mother hasn't sent it. She's not here yet.
For Tim's mother, Karen Lewis, who had staked her children's education on her belief in public schools, this day was almost as important as it was for Tim.
Tim, come on, Tim. It's encouragingly a little plump. Open that first, and then this one second.
Is that from Dory?
No, that's Bowden.
I'd rather open Bowden first.
Come on.
No, Bowden first.
Tim had letters from both Bowden and Yale.
Oh. What happened? What was the
The
mail?
guy, of all the days, he was not supposed to work, and then he came in an hour late. Accepted at Bowden. Terrific. Great. I'm starting to see that. I can't stand it. Tim, one of these days.
Oh, man.
It's lucky you're leaving home. It is a great pleasure.
Oh, that's nice.
That's beautiful, beautiful. Come on. Barbara, or where did she go? I want her to see this fast. Come back.
For Karen Lewis, for Principal Barbara Lusk, Tim's acceptance was one small victory in a much larger struggle. Last spring, the future of Kansas City schools still seemed very much in doubt. At the Southwest Community Carnival, those fighting for reform were still all too alone.
How much did you make on the machines last night? Well at all. Were kids using it? I mean, it was...
Still, only the same dedicated few.
Of the weather and all.
The future for schools like Southwest finally hangs on holding on to the children of the middle class, on keeping students like Tim's younger brother, Johnny.
Of course, I'd like to see him at Southwest. Right now, I think Southwest is fine. But I'm not sure what it will be like in 2 years. That's how much things change in a few years. I'm not really sure what the future holds for my little brother.
Next, a look at the final peril.
By the year 2000, almost 1 in every 3 students will be black or Hispanic. In 53 of our largest cities, non-whites will be the majority. A national ghetto, not only of race, but of economic class. Race, class, threatening to break apart our public school system. In many cities today, the long desegregation struggle has been halted. Despite significant gains in the last 20 years in one urban area after another, public schools are now resegregating, threatening to institutionalize in our schools the deepening divisions in our society. 17 years ago, following the worst racial convulsions this country had seen, a presidential commission declared that America was moving toward 2 societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. The report warned of the grim conditions of inner-city schools. Our neglect of those warnings has now imperiled us all, and we're confronted with a hard decision. Either we move through our schools to build one common American neighborhood, or America could move further toward fracturing into 2 societies, one explosively unequal to the other. That second America is emerging most ominously in our central cities, where 1 out of every 4 students comes from an impoverished family, where black and Hispanic students are clustered in highly segregated, underfunded schools, where the dropout rates can exceed 50% among Spanish-speaking youngsters. In these city schools, one sees most starkly the schism in American society.
If you have one group of students who become empowered through education, that is, they can use language effectively, they have general knowledge by which they understand the issues and can debate them, they have enough confidence to know how to participate actively. And on the other hand, you have students who have simply marked time for 4 years, but haven't gained any degree of confidence or skill. Then we've built a 2-class system in which people with power control the lives of those who are unempowered. That's not good democracy and not good government. It's a disastrous social policy. In the end, those who don't have the authority and the power will become increasingly angry that they can't participate and help shape their own destiny.
I know some people, they don't know how to read and write. They just give up.
They start stealing and hang out on corners and stuff like that.
The end would be crisis and confrontation, and I think a dramatic erosion in the dream we call America.
The irony is almost 40% of all black students now study in well-integrated schools.
Look, Sarah's finished.
There's a growing black middle class and a dramatic improvement in scores among black students, narrowing the scholastic gap between black and white. But now there's a critical race between that hopeful promise and the growing numbers of disadvantaged youngsters. That haunts those fighting for reform in Kansas City.
What happens to these kids if we refuse to educate them for 12 years through the system, while everything else around them that we let them have access to says you can grow up and be anything you want, when they get grown up and they look around and they can't be anything they want? They cannot even get a job.
Without the money to revive their system, without enough white children to integrate the schools, Kansas City resorted to a radical move. It tried to break down the wall between city and suburbs, black and white, rich and poor, by suing to incorporate the more affluent white suburbs around them into one common school system. But for years, the suburbs have fought back all efforts to erase the district lines, insulating their schools, their children. With the suit having trailed on for 7 years, it's now only a dimming hope. Still isolated from the suburbs, unable to get enough state or federal funding, unable to raise enough community support. Kansas City, like so many other cities, is left with separate and unequal schools.
I believe we're in trouble. We say public education, and we really mean public. We mean all races, we mean disabled, we mean everybody. That takes money. Do we want to be taxed to really have a public education that's good for all people? You know, these are things that really have to be answered by people like you and me in order to make the push so that politically we can get the type of education we want. Therefore, it's just a big question in my mind, are we able? Will we do it?
We can no longer delay finally answering that question if we hope to avert a widening split by race and class. Beyond that concern, if America is left with a generation of students unmotivated, disconnected, a generation of mediocrity, it will critically imperil our security, our economic and scientific strength, and the survival of the democratic idea. We are moving now into a world of the most testing competitions, a world in which America's strength must begin, as it always has, in the minds of our children in our public schools.
Moving as we are into the 21st century, we want to have a population that is literate in math and science. We want every individual to have the mental resources to make choices, to choose a vocation, to change a vocation if his job becomes technologically obsolete. And the fact that a child comes from a poor home is not a rationale for not teaching him. We want people with mental agility. And we want a population that can use language intelligently. We want people with a knowledge of history so that they know who they are and what our country is.
In our public schools are those who will write our laws, will build our cities, will shape the destiny of America.
Okay, can you see our heads? Come on, come on, get down.
Our future will lie in the skill of their minds,
You're starting to get there.
in their sense of humanity and of the democratic ideal.
Teachers have pulled me aside and said to me, what you have is a gift, and you should do the most with that gift you have. They care.
I've had some teachers that have taught me how to think intelligently, and what I teach you in my class is just to prepare you for life.
Well, I have this big old 6'6" father, and when I was real young and small, getting out of line, and take his hand out, and you know, that's when I was doing bad and all. And then after little whoopings and spankings and everything, I felt that, you know, I should go out there and do it.
We have persevered through teacher strikes, racial tension, and administrative change. Those of us who graduate tonight are proof that barriers can be overcome.
Well, everybody's coming to see this graduation. They're gonna be really excited and proud of me.
You know, I look at all phases of life, and I say, well, people die, people move on. You just have to go head on with your ideals and your dreams and your aspirations. And you have to do the best that you feel, you know, that you can do. Make it.
to be our alma mater. Thou art strong and true.
This is an incredible society. It's a wonderful governmental system that we have. And we have a long record, a century and a half, of leading the world in popular education. I can't believe we're going to let ourselves down by not having the kinds of schools that we want. It's not easy, but it, I think, is a challenge that's worthy of a country that has led the world in universal education throughout the 19th and 20th centuries.
We have spent all this time tonight so that you may consider the problems of our public schools. They are enormous, and they pose for all of us as grave and as important a challenge as the nation has ever faced. We've seen this evening that there are no quick fixes. There must be a decade of dedication as massive as our effort to put a man on the moon. The costs will be enormous, but if our schools fail, we all fail.
If you wish a transcript, send $5 to Journal Graphics, Box 770, Ansonia Station, New York 10023. This has been a presentation of ABC News.
Tomorrow on ABC's World News.